Hello, everybody. Today's topic is going to be hypertension. Let us begin by going through some of the common terminologies like systolic pressure, diastolic pressures, which are the pressures at the top of the pulse and the bottom of the pulse, respectively. Pulse pressure is the difference between the two, and since systolic pressure is a measure of the cardiac performance and diastolic is related to the peripheral resistance, pulse pressure is directly proportional to stroke volume output divided by the arterial recompliance. The next term is the mean arterial pressure, and it is the average of all the pressures taken per millisecond in one cardiac cycle. Now, it differs from the simple diastole plus systole divided by 2 because diastole occupies for a greater 60% of the cardiac cycle as compared to 40% of the systole. The formula is diastole plus 1/3 of the pulse pressure or 2/3 of diastole plus 1/3 of systole. Moving on to the regulation of arterial pressure, we have the neural regulation and we have the renal regulation. So the neural regulation is mainly by the autonomic nervous system, and in autonomic nervous system, more role is played by the sympathetic nervous system. Now firstly, let's look at the vasomotor center. It is situated in the brainstem, particularly in lower pons and medulla, and it has certain areas that are dense with neurons. So there is the vasoconstrictor area, the vasodilator area, the sensory area, cardioinhibitory and cardioacceleratory area. Vasoconstrictor area is present anterolaterally of the upper half of medulla. Vasodilator area is present anterolaterally in the lower half of the medulla, and sensory area is present in the tractus solitarius posterolaterally of medulla and lower pons both. What are their functions? Sensory area receives signals from the circulatory system via two nerves, that is the vagus and glossopharyngeal, or the ninth and 10th nerve. Upon receiving signals from the circulatory system, sensory area then either stimulates the vasoconstrictor area or vasodilator area according to the needs. Say the blood pressure is high, then it will stimulate the vasodilator area, which will send inhibitory signals to the vasoconstrictor area. If the blood pressure is lower than normal, then the vasoconstrictor area is stimulated. Neurons of this area send their fibers down to all levels of the spinal cord. From the thoracic level and the first to lumbar level, spinal nerves emerge and they pass towards the sympathetic ganglion chain, which are present on both sides of the vertebral column. From the thoracic level and the first to lumbar level, spinal nerves emerge and they pass towards the sympathetic ganglion chain, which are present on both sides of the vertebral column. There are two possible pathways from this point, which is for the specific sympathetic nerves that innervate the internal viscera of the vasculature and also the heart. The second pathway is the peripheral portions of the spinal nerves, which innervate the vasculature of peripheral vessels. The neurotransmitter substance is norepinephrine, and it stimulates the alpha adrenergic receptors present in the blood vessels to cause vasoconstriction. Simultaneously, sympathetic stimulation to adrenal medulla further releases norepinephrine into the circulation. However, though, in some tissues, norepinephrine released from adrenal medulla stimulates the beta adrenergic receptors, which causes vasodilation instead. A function of the vasomotor center is to maintain the vasomotor tone of the blood vessels by continuous partial slow firing of sympathetic vasoconstrictor nerve fibers all the time. And without this vasomotor tone, the blood pressure can fall from 100 mmHg to 50 mmHg. When one exercises, with the activation of motor areas, there is also the activation of reticulating activating system. This has three effects: vasoconstrictor stimulation, cardioacceleratory stimulation, and an inhibition of the parasympathetic vagal signals. The effects of these is constriction of blood vessels and stimulation of heart. So heart rate increases up to 3x sometimes. There is increased force of contractility. Because of the arteriolar constriction, the total peripheral resistance increases, and because of the constrictions of veins and large vessels, the venous return increases. Hence, the force of contraction of the heart increases even more. All of this leads to an increased arterial pressure. A number of reflex mechanisms helps maintain the normal pressure, such as baroreceptor reflex, chemoreceptor reflex, and volume reflex. The baroreceptors are also called as pressoreceptors. They are spray type nerve endings which act as stretch receptors. They are present in few numbers in every large vessels of the neck and thorax, but in some places they are very concentrated. So those are carotid sinus in the internal carotid artery above the bifurcation and in the aortic arch wall. As you can see in the diagram, the glossopharyngeal nerve through Herring's nerve and the vagus nerve carry impulses from the carotid sinus and the aortic bodies respectively. They take it to the sensory area, which then stimulates two areas, the vasodilator area and the cardioinhibitory area, which reduces the heart rate and the force of contraction, bringing down the arterial blood pressure. If you look at the graph, a minimum pressure of about 60 mmHg is needed for baroreceptors to sense the stretch. Also, it requires a change in pressure, and a high stationary pressure will not lead to generation of impulses. When you change your body posture from the lying down position to standing, there is marked reduction in the pressure in the upper part of the body and in the head. So there can be a loss of consciousness if the blood pressure is not maintained. However, when this change in the posture occurs and the reduction in pressure is led, a strong sympathetic discharge occurs throughout the body because of the baroreceptor reflex, and the pressure is brought back to normal. The chemoreceptor reflex is very similar to the baroreceptor reflex, except they are sensitive to a decreased oxygen level, increased carbon dioxide, and increased hydrogen ion concentration in the blood. Chemoreceptors are present in small chemoreceptor organs that are around 2 mm in size. There are two carotid bodies, one in each bifurcation, and about 1 to 3 aortic bodies adjacent to the aorta. A small nutrient artery branching from the main systemic artery supplies these chemoreceptor organs, and their responses are more significant when the blood pressure falls below 80 mmHg. Volume reflex involves low pressure receptors which are present in the wall of atria and pulmonary artery. They react to changes in blood volume instead of systemic arterial pressure. When there is a stretch in the atria, hypothalamus is signaled to decrease ADH secretion, which decreases the reabsorption of fluid. Additionally, there is dilatation of afferent arterioles in the kidney, which increases glomerular filtration. Both of this leads to increased fluid loss and the blood volume comes back to normal. The CNS ischemic response is an emergency pressure control system that prevents further decrease in the arterial pressure when the blood flow to the brain has already reached a lethal level. It becomes significant only below 60 mmHg and reaches its peak response between 15 to 20 mm. The mechanism when the blood flow decreases to a point where it causes nutritional deficiency, there is accumulation of CO2, lactic acid and other acidic substances at VMC in the brain stem. The CNS ischemia acts as a potent stimulator for vasoconstrictor areas and cardioacceleratory areas. The response is so powerful that it can lead to a blood pressure of 250 mmHg for 10 minutes, and there is complete or almost complete occlusion of peripheral vessels. Similarly, there is a Cushing's reaction, which is a type of CNS ischemic response when the CSF pressure increases enough to compress the cerebral arteries. So, since there is a cutoff of the blood supply, this CNS ischemic response is activated and the arterial blood pressure becomes greater than the CSF pressure, which restores the blood flow and ischemia is relieved. Another method of regulation of pressure is the renal regulation, wherein if there is an excess of blood volume, this is secreted by the kidney so that the normal ABP is restored. There are two methods for this, which is pressure diuresis and pressure natriuresis, wherein the renal output of water and salt respectively is directly proportional to ABP. मतलब जितना ज़्यादा increase in the blood pressure उतना ज़्यादा renal output. Now what is the long term arterial pressure? It is the pressure which is considered normal and the body maintains the pressure at this value. This is determined by a simple graph called the near infinite feedback gain, and the equilibrium point is represented by the intersection between the water and salt intake and the renal output curve. There are two factors that affect this change in long term arterial pressure, which is if there is a shift in the renal output curve across the pressure axis, or if there is an increase or decrease in the salt and water intake. As you can see, there is a right shift across the pressure axis and an increase in the salt and water intake, both of which increases the long term arterial pressure to around 150 mmHg. In reality, the chronic curve of renal output is much steeper because there is an additional process of indirect neuronal and hormonal effects that control the blood pressure, which is either activation or inhibition of sympathetic nervous system and reduction or formation of antinatriuretic factors such as aldosterone and angiotensin. How does an increased fluid volume and an increased salt intake actually lead to the elevation of arterial pressure? The formula that equates the product of cardiac output and total peripheral resistance to arterial pressure suggests that the blood pressure is directly proportional to both of these variables. So, increased ECF osmomolality leads to the activation of thirst center and hypothalamus posterior pituitary secretions, that is ADH secretion, both of which lead to an increased ECF volume and blood volume by reabsorption in the renal tubules and also an increased water intake. Because of this, the mean circulatory filling pressure rises, venous return increases, and thus the cardiac output is increased. Now, cardiac output has two effects. One, it directly increases the blood pressure as seen in the formula. Two, it leads to a process called autoregulation, which is when there is an increased blood flow to the tissues. To counteract this, the tissues undergo vasoconstriction in their vasculature, and this increases the TPR. There is another mechanism for control which is called as the renin-angiotensin system, which reacts to a decreased blood pressure. There are modified smooth muscle cells called juxtaglomerular cells in the afferent arterioles adjacent to the glomeruli. These have prorenin in them, and intrinsic reactions in response to decreased ABP occurs in kidney, which splits prorenin to renin, which enters the blood circulation. Most of it passes out of the kidney, but a small amount remains for local circulation. Outside the kidney, renin has an enzymatic action on angiotensinogen, which is a globulin also called as renin substrate. This produces a 10 amino acid compound called the angiotensin 1, and it has mild vasoconstrictor properties. However, angiotensin converting enzyme present mostly in lung vessel epithelium and also in other blood vessels and kidneys convert it into an 8 amino acid compound called as the angiotensin 2, which is a powerful vasoconstrictor. But it only remains for 1 to 2 minutes because it is broken down by angiotensinases. Angiotensin 2 has three actions: vasoconstriction of arteries, which increases the total peripheral resistance, mild vasoconstriction of vein, which increases the venous return and hence the cardiac output, and decreased excretion of salt and water, leading to an increased ECF volume. The increase in ECF occurs through two pathways. One is through direct renal retention by constricting the renal arteriole so that blood flow decreases and peritubular capillary pressure decreases. This leads to reabsorption of fluid from tubules. Second action is on the tubular cells, which increases the tubular reabsorption of sodium and water. An indirect action is through adrenal gland stimulation leading to secretion of aldosterone, which increases the sodium retention and also of water. This marks the end of the physiology section of blood pressure. We now move on to discussing the pathology of disorders relating to hypertension. Hypertension is divided into different stages depending upon the values of the arterial blood pressure. Borderline is when it can be managed by improving your lifestyle and adopting healthier changes. When the blood pressure rises above 140 mm Hg systole and 90 mm Hg diastole, it can be divided into mild, moderate, and severe. Hypertensive vascular disease or hypertension has certain complications involving damage to certain organs such as heart, brain, kidney, eyes, especially. They lead to conditions such as atherosclerotic, coronary heart disease, heart failure, aortic dissection, stroke, encephalopathy, dementia, renal failure, retinopathy, etc. Hypertension can be divided into two types on the basis of their causes. One is primary or essential or idiopathic, where the cause is not known. This accounts for 90 to 95% of all cases. Secondary hypertension has an identifiable underlying cause, which is mostly related to renal disorders or adrenal disorders. This here is a picture, acronym, whatever you would like to call it, is a method to remember the different conditions that lead to secondary hypertension, divided into renal, endocrine, cardiovascular, neurologic, and genetic groups. So, a cargo that carries a PAV, so PAVCRG, and then CAPH, but with P's instead of B's, etc. Next, we discuss about the mechanisms of development of essential hypertension. Remember that these do not account for the cause, these are processes that bring about the change in arterial pressure. There is decreased renal sodium excretion, which increases fluid volume and hence cardiac output and blood pressure. There is increased vascular resistance, either through vasoconstriction or structural wall changes, such as in atherosclerosis. Then we have genetic and environmental contributions. So there are certain angiotensin polymorphisms that can occur, or variations in the angiotensin 2 receptor coding genes, and RAS polymorphisms, which play a role in the coding of different molecules that we saw in the renin-angiotensin system control. And in environmental, we have unhealthy habits such as smoking, increased salt consumption, physical inactivity, stress, and obesity. So now we discuss the morphology of hypertensive vascular disease. It accelerates atherogenesis and it causes degenerative changes. So there are a number of small blood vessel diseases that can occur. There is hyaline arteriosclerosis, which leads to nephrosclerosis when it occurs in the kidneys, and hyperplastic arteriosclerosis, which leads to necrotizing arteriolitis, again prominent in kidney. A thing to remember is the first two, that is hyaline arteriosclerosis and nephrosclerosis, are associated with benign hypertension, and hyperplastic arteriosclerosis, necrotizing arteriolitis, are associated with malignant or severe hypertension. As suggested by the name, hyaline means there is a deposition of homogeneous pink hyaline layer which leads to thickening of the wall. There is loss of structural detail and there is luminal narrowing. How does this happen? Is there is a leakage of plasma through the injured epithelial cells into the wall. This increases the production of extracellular matrix by the smooth muscle cells in the wall in response to this chronic hemodynamic stress. When it occurs in the kidney, it is called nephrosclerosis. It causes vascular scarring and glomerular scarring, and it is caused by arteriolar narrowing. The morphology of hyperplastic arteriosclerosis is different than hyaline. Here you can see onion skin like pattern, that is concentric laminated thickening, which consists of smooth muscle cells and thickened basement membrane. If it occurs in kidney with additional fibrinoid deposits and vessel wall necrosis, it is called as necrotizing arteriolitis. Hypertensive heart diseases are a complication of hypertension due to the increased demands that is placed on the heart. The ventricles and the myocytes, as an adaptive response to this overload, undergo hypertrophy, but there is a capacity to this and exhaustion is reached soon, which leads to dysfunction, dilation, congestive heart failure, and even sudden death. Hypertensive heart diseases or HHDs can be divided into two types based on the side of the heart that is affected, into left-sided or systemic hypertensive heart disease, which is more common, and right-sided or pulmonary heart disease, also called as cor pulmonale. Cor pulmonale is characterized by right ventricular hypertrophy and dilation, frequently associated with right heart failure. The cause for this is chronic lung parenchyma or vasculature disorders. The onset of right sided pulmonary hypertensive heart disease or cor pulmonale can be either acute or slow, insidious, and progressive. In acute, it is due to pulmonary embolism and only right ventricular dilation occurs. There is no hypertrophy and the heart size is normal. In slow, insidious, progressive onset, the underlying cause is the chronic pressure overload. There is right ventricular hypertrophy and sometimes also of right atria, which leads to the ventricular failure. This further leads to dilation, and there may also be findings of atheromatous plaques in pulmonary artery. Then we have the systemic hypertensive heart disease, and to diagnose this, there must be left ventricular hypertrophy in the absence of any other cardiovascular disease like valvular stenosis. Also, there should be a history or a pathologic evidence of hypertension in the patient. Morphologically speaking, we can divide it into gross and microscopic. In gross, there is left ventricular hypertrophy, obviously, but in the earlier stages, it is without dilation. However, though, as it progresses to a late stage, dilation can occur, especially if systemic hypertensive heart disease has led to congestive heart failure. There is increase in heart weight to greater than 500 gram, and the left ventricle wall thickness also increases to greater than 2 centimeter. This thickness leads to stiffness and impaired diastole filling. This can lead to left atrial dilation as well. Microscopically, the diameter of the myocytes increases transversely, and the nuclear changes are that the nucleus becomes enlarged and prominent, and there is hyperchromasia. Therefore, the nuclei is said to be boxcar nuclei. There is also additionally intracellular fibrosis. In clinical features, we talk about the discovery in patient, and this is important because systemic HHD is typically asymptomatic. So the instances where they find out that the person is suffering from this condition is when they go to a routine physical examination and a high BP is spotted, or from ECG and echocardiographic findings of LVH, that is left ventricular hypertrophy, or if there is an onset of atrial fibrillation due to left atrial dilation like we saw before, and lastly, if the disease has progressed to the stage of congestive heart failure. Now, why does this progression occur? Because the hypertrophic myocytes, they fail to contract efficiently. This is due to the fact that there are structural abnormalities in the sarcomeres that are newly produced. Second reason to this is because the vascular supply that was already present is now inadequate to supply this increase in muscle mass and increased thickness of the ventricles. Now, depending upon the treatment, whether or not it is taken, there are four possible outcomes. Either a person enjoys normal longevity and dies of an unrelated cause later, or they develop ischemic heart disease due to hypertension, which potentiates coronary atherosclerosis. They can also experience renal damage and brain stroke, and like it has been mentioned before, the disease can progress to congestive heart failure. This marks the end of pathology and disorders relating to hypertension. Next, we talk about the pharmacology and management with antihypertensive drugs. We learn about 5 classes of drugs used in antihypertensive treatment, which are diuretics, renin-angiotensin system inhibitors, sympathetic inhibitors, calcium channel blockers, and vasodilators. 1. Classifications are important. 2. The names of the drugs and classes are so hard to remember. So I came up with silly acronyms and pictures that help me with it, and if you think it will help you too, then go ahead, use them. Firstly, vasodilators, and with dilators I remember big, and from big I associate big bugs and spending too much money, so the person goes shopping at H&M. And those are the initials for arteriolar dilators, which are hydralazine and minodixil. And with arterio and venodilators we have sodium nitroprusside. Next we have diuretics, in which there are three classes: thiazides, which are low ceiling, and there is high ceiling and aldosterone antagonists. So for thiazides I remember the Hindi expression chi for disgust. So C, H and I are the initials for thiazide, which stands for chlorthalidone, hydrochlorothiazide and indapamide. Next, for aldosterone antagonists, both of them are A, so I remember apple, and apple sounds close to eplerenone. And then I remember this photo in which there is a glass of milk, and gasp, on the glass of milk is a spider. So spironolactone. Renin-angiotensin system inhibitors has three classes: the angiotensin converting enzyme inhibitor, angiotensin receptor blocker, and direct renin inhibitor. So for ACE inhibitors, I remember the phrase ELF-C-PQRT, which is represented in this drawing. There is an elf who is looking at an electrocardiogram, and PQRST are the waves in it. Enalapril, lisinopril, fosinopril, captopril, perindopril, ramipril, and trandolapril. And because pril is the suffix for every drug, we have the calendar showing the month of April. For ARB, I remember TV coil. So telmisartan, valsartan, candesartan, olmesartan, irbesartan, and losartan. And on the TV, you can see a picture of Satan himself, which helps you remember the suffix sartan. Calcium channel blockers is classified into dihydropyridines and non-dihydropyridines, which are the phenylalkylamine and benzothiazepine. How I remember dihydropyridine is by this really fancy dip. So fancy for felodipine, amlodipine, nifedipine, nicardipine, and clinidipine. And dip to remember the suffix dipping. In sympathetic inhibitors, there is the alpha blocker, beta blocker, both alpha plus beta blocker, and central sympatholytics. Whenever there is a beta blocker involved, the suffix lol is present, and for alpha blockers, it is zosyn. We look at each classification in detail, beginning with diuretics, covering their pharmacologic actions, target population, and side effects. So low ceiling diuretics are better antihypertensives than high ceiling diuretics. It causes immediate diuresis and plasma volume reduction by 5 to 15%, which reduces the cardiac output. However, the compensatory mechanisms are activated and there is a restoration of sodium and plasma volume and cardiac output. However, though, there is a persistent deficiency of Na plus and volume by about 5%. Because of this reduction in Na plus intracellularly, the stiffness reduces and total peripheral resistance falls, thereby decreasing the blood pressure, which develops gradually in 2 to 4 weeks. The reduction is about 10 mmHg. It is more effective in the elderly and it is used on its own in 30% cases, especially mild hypertensive. It is also used in other grades, moderate and severe hypertension, along with other antihypertensive to prevent their tolerance. High ceiling drugs are better diuretics, and the fall in BP is entirely based on the reduction in plasma volume and cardiac output, as there is no deficit of Na plus that persists round the clock. Once the natriuretic effect is over after 4 to 6 hours, the compensatory mechanism takes over and restoration occurs. The side effects are fluid electrolyte imbalance and weakness, and it is only used in patients who have chronic renal failure, congestive heart failure, or are on vasodilator drugs that have fluid retention possibilities. Aldosterone antagonist causes fall in BP very slightly, and thus it is always used in addition to other antihypertensives. It causes hyperkalemia, thereby preventing K plus loss, and it also prevents hypertension related complications such as ventricular hypertrophy, vascular hypertrophy, and renal fibrosis. Side effects are more in spironolactone, such as gynecomastia, impotence, and menstrual irregularities. The advantages and disadvantages of thiazides are divided into headings for the ease of learning, and there are 2 points under each of them. To remember these headings, there is yet another picture representation. So, for advantages, it comes under general, elderly, and mechanism. So, we remember that by GEM. In general, we have low cost and single dose. For elderly, it is effective in them, especially in case of isolated systolic hypertension, and it prevents Ca2 plus excretion, so it reduces the risk of osteoporosis in them. Related to mechanism, no fluid retention occurs, so this helps in the prevention of tolerance development, and also it prevents postural hypotension and sympathetic side effects from occurring. With disadvantages, we remember the ad of MDH masala. MDH. So, MDH stands for metabolism disorders and hyper or hypo. Hyperuricemia occurs by inhibiting urate excretion, so there is an increased risk for gout. Hypokalemia occurs, so it leads to muscle pain, fatigue, etc. In metabolism, carbohydrate intolerance occurs, due to which there could be precipitation of diabetes due to inhibition of insulin release. Dyslipidemia, wherein LDL and triglycerides are increased and HDL, which is the good cholesterol, decreases. Disorders, erectile dysfunction in males, and sudden cardiac death, torsades de pointes, ischemic ventricular fibrillation can occur. Talking about the RAS inhibitors, their mechanism can be understood if you review the renin-angiotensin system section that we learned in physiology. So we'll discuss the target. For ACE inhibitors, it works on their own in 50% of the cases, but if they are combined with a diuretic and beta blocker, the efficacy is improved to 90%. It is used both in essential, that is primary, and renovascular, that is secondary hypertension, except in the case of bilateral renal artery stenosis. They are the most appropriate choice of antihypertensive in case of diabetic nephropathy, non-diabetic CKD, left ventricular vascular hypertrophy, CHF, angina, and post-myocardial infarction cases, because in these cases they tend to improve the condition of the heart, and also they do not precipitate diabetes unlike thiazides. They are more effective in younger people, age group less than 55, and in the white population. One disadvantage is that ACE inhibitors increase kinin production that leads to persistent dry cough. Moving on to ARBs, their action reaches a peak at 2 to 4 weeks, and if they are combined with hydrochlorothiazide, there is further fall in BP. Advantages is that in ARBs there is no kinin production, so side effects like dry cough, angioedema, urticaria, taste disturbances do not exist. ARBs, in contrast, are more used in the black population. The smooth muscle cells of the vasculature have voltage gated L-type calcium channel. These have 3 stages of conformation. 1. The activated stage, 2. The inactivated stage, and 3. An intermediate between these two called the resting stage. There is a recovery period between the inactivated stage and the resting stage, wherein the channel gets ready for receiving more calcium influx. Calcium channel blockers delays this recovery period, thereby reducing the availability of calcium needed for excitation contraction coupling intracellularly. Because of this, there is no vasoconstriction and instead vasodilation occurs. BP falls by reducing the total peripheral resistance. No cardiac output compromise happens. There are a number of advantages of calcium channel blockers which we can remember by the phrase chemistry fam or ChemFam. C stands for no CNS effects or sedation. H for no hemodynamic compromise, that is, the physical work capacity of the person taking this medicine is maintained. E, effective in elderly, black, and people with low renin hypertension. M, no male sexual dysfunction. F, no fetal effects, can be used in pregnancy. A, no indication in case of angina, asthma, perivascular diseases. M, no metabolic imbalance such as dyslipidemia, uric acid, and electrolyte imbalance. However, though, the non-dihydropyridines, which is verapamil and diltiazem, have negative chronotropic and dromotropic effects as well, which can worsen congestive heart failure, cardiac conduction, and edema. Therefore, beta blockers are mild hypertensives and therefore they're used by themselves only in 30 to 40% of the cases. They have a number of ADRs and contraindications wherein they worsen cardiac, pulmonary, perivascular diseases. They aggravate ischemia, myocardial infarction, and angina. There is dyslipidemia, decreased physical work capacity, loss of libido, forgetfulness, nightmares, and they're less suitable for elderly. There is also rebound hypertension. Alpha blockers cause vasodilation of resistance vessels and capacitance vessels both. There is decrease in TPR and cardiac output. There is little reflex tachycardia and renin release as a compensatory mechanism. ADRs include postural hypotension, drowsiness, headache, weakness, palpitation, blurred vision, nasal blockade, dry mouth, and rash. In case of central sympatholytics, there are two, that are clonidine and methyl dopa. The actions of clonidine is as partial agonist of the alpha 2 receptor in vasomotor center of the brainstem. It inhibits the sympathetic outflow and increases the vagal parasympathetic tone. So it decreases BP directly, and there is also bradycardia. Both TPR and cardiac output and heart rate are decreased. Methyl dopa is a selective alpha 2 agonist which reduces TPR more than it reduces the cardiac output. Arteriodilators act by decreasing the total peripheral resistance and thereby the diastolic blood pressure. However, reflex compensatory mechanisms get activated and there is an increase in cardiac output and tachycardia which can precipitate angina. Additionally, renin release occurs, there is increase in aldosterone, Na and water retention, thereby precipitating edema and causing a hyperdynamic circulatory state. Tolerance develops if not combined with thiazide and beta blocker. In case of arteriovenodilators, the action is rapid and the duration of action is short, that is 2 to 5 minutes. Nitroprusside enters the endothelial cells and RBCs where it is split into NO enzymatically and non-enzymatically both. NO causes vasodilation in both capacitance and resistant vessel, thereby decreasing the venous return and total peripheral resistance respectively. Moreover, in this case, no tolerance develops. It is additionally beneficial in patients with heart failure and ventricular dilation because it reduces both the afterload and preload on the heart. NO is metabolized into cyanide in the body, which is converted into thiocyanate in the liver. Thiocyanate toxicity can occur at higher levels, leading to psychosis and CNS effects. Palpitation, nervousness, weakness, disorientation, vomiting, perspiration, and pain in abdomen are some of the other ADRs. Since we've looked at all the classes of antihypertensives, we now move on to the treatment and choice of drugs, which depends upon a lot of factors such as race, age, contraindications present, if any, the stage of hypertension, etc. To determine the drug of choice, we follow this simple flow chart key method. What is their race? Are they black or non-black? If they're black, do they have edema or heart failure? You use CCB or calcium channel blocker if they are not present. These are contraindications of CCB, and if they are present, then you switch to diuretics. If they are non-black, what is their age? Are they young or old? If they are old, you go back to the question of edema and heart failure. If they are young, are they pregnant and with any ACE and ARB contraindication? If yes, you use a beta blocker. If no, you use ACE and ARBs. These are the first line drugs for mild hypertensive. If it does not resolve in case of diuretics, then you add ACE and ARBs, which is a combination. If it does not resolve with CCBs and ACE, you combine them both. If it does not work with beta blockers, then you add CCBs and not diuretics, because diuretics plus beta blockers can precipitate diabetes. Moving on to the third stage, if two drug combination does not resolve, then you move on to three drug combination, which is ACE or ARB plus CCB plus diuretics. If it does not resolve still, then there is a chance that they have diabetes or chronic kidney diseases. The patient is now said to have resistant hypertension. The next question to be asked is about their serum K plus level. If it is above 4.5 millimole per liter, the dose of the thiazide or diuretic has to be increased. If it is below 4.5 millimole per liter, aldosterone antagonist has to be added to the three combination drugs. If it does not resolve still, then you switch the aldosterone antagonist or the higher dose of thiazide with beta or alpha blocker. Hypertensive emergency is when the systolic blood pressure is greater than 220 mmHg and diastolic is greater than 120 mmHg with evidence of active target organ damage. When there is no organ damage but the same levels of blood pressure, it is known as hypertensive urgency. The treatment for emergency is parenteral drugs, preferably IV, which are fast, predictable, titratable, and short lasting. Therefore, dihydropyridines of calcium channel blockers, nitrodilators, and adrenergic blockers are used. The goal is to reduce the mean BP by 25% in a few minutes to 1 to 2 hours time, followed by gradual reduction to not below 160 by 100 mmHg. The drugs that are used are nicardipine, sodium nitroprusside, glyceryl trinitrate, labetalol, and esmolol. The description of these drugs are given in a tabulated form to make it easier to learn, with their general description, the combination that they used with, conditions in which they are most appropriately used, disorders, and their contraindications. To access this table, click on the link which leads to the PDF document of the notes. We have reached the end of this lesson. I hope it was clear and crisp, and I'm glad to have provided you with the help. If you're interested in more videos and lessons, then please fill the form below. Thank you. Bye.